Well, welcome to Forensic Forecast, everyone. We'll try this again.
It's like you had a warm-up.
Ducks. We got our sillies out.
This has already gone so well today. I'm so glad I did this. I'd like to welcome, first of all, Cindy Murphy. How are you doing, Cindy?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Lee.
Awesome. Now that people can see and hear you, that introduction means a lot more. Cindy works at Gilware, formerly of Madison Police Department, and
I also work for SANS.
She also works for SANS. Teaching what class?
Teaching 585 Advanced Smartphone Forensics, and Lee just got his cert.
I did the GASF.
The GASF. You got gas.
Yeah. I got the GASF. And we also have Sarah Edwards joining us. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing well, Lee. Doing well.
Good. Sarah, also the author and instructor for SANS Forensics 518, the MAC class. Very good class. Highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in doing that for sure. And then we also have Jessica Hyde and Ryan Benson both joining us. How are you guys doing?
Great. Hi, everyone.
So finally, it's working. So now we can talk about some cool stuff. And the first thing I want to talk about is the Forensic Forecast Awards. As you guys probably already know, if you're watching this, we have the annual Forensic Forecast Awards that we do at the SANS DFIR Summit each year in Austin. And nominations for that have just opened. And Cindy was kind enough to read through all of the categories before when we couldn't hear or see her. So, Cindy, would you like to go through them again for us, please?
Sure, I'll do that one more time. Acting as Vanna White. We have Open Source Forensic Software of the Year, Digital Forensics Blog of the Year, the Phone Forensic Hardware of the Year, Computer Forensic Software of the Year, Digital Forensic Book of the Year, Computer Forensic Hardware of the Year, Phone Forensic Software of the Year, Digital Forensic Resource of the Year, not to be confused with the Blog of the Year, because there are other resources, the Digital Forensics Organization of the Year, and the Digital Forensic Investigator of the Year.
Yeah, so we opened up the new category this year, Digital Forensic Resource of the Year, and we did that in response to a few things. So last year, we saw websites like DFIR Training, This Week in Forensics, and things of that nature, and about DFIR pop up, and we kind of shoehorned them in to different categories. Like for some of them, I suggested, you could do either like Blog of the Year or Organization of the Year or something like that. And it didn't really work out too well. So Jessica and I had been talking about this before, actually. And I was thinking Digital Forensic Resource of the Year. And then she came in and was like, how about Digital Forensic Resource of the Year? I'm like, well, all right, if someone else besides me thinks it's a good idea, then it must be okay. So yeah, thanks, Jessica. So we have that now, and I just want to try and just make that little bit of a distinction there. So why, I'm going to put you on the spot now, Jessica. Why would someone choose to vote for something like About DFIR in Resource of the Year as opposed to Blog of the Year or Organization of the Year?
Sure. So About DFIR is a compendium, right? That's even what they say on their website, of other resources, and makes almost like a go-to site where somebody can go to for a bunch of information, just like DFIR.training. So instead of actually being posts about specific pieces of research or information, it is more of a resource that you would go to find all of the other information about DFIR from all the other blogs, from where training resources are, all the white papers that are out there, jobs that are available, research, which I think we might talk about later. So in DFIR training, the giant tool database So these are resources you go to find out about other things. They actually, both sites have links to other blogs. DFIR.training has a feed of other blogs. So it's more of where you go to find all of that other information. It's something the community really needed. So it's great that we have these resources as opposed to an organization, because I would think of something like SANS as an organization that puts out forensics content. Magnet Forensics obviously also puts out white papers and forensics content. So there are other organizations that put out content, and those are content creators and do things in the community that way, as opposed to being a resource that is a compendium of other things that exist in the community.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, and not that I was trying to give any preferential treatment to about DFIR by any means. No.
No. And, if we can mention, an important thing I think is that people can nominate more than one thing, right? Like when you vote, I had this conversation with somebody the other day. When you vote is when you have to not sleep on it. When you nominate, you can just nominate everybody and then make your own life harder when you have to vote.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can nominate as many times as you want for multiple people or whatever in categories. Yeah. But when it comes to voting, you get one vote per category, and that's it. And I actually have been pretty ruthless about that, going through and deleting things in the past. So, so by all means.
This is good from my perspective, because last year my Murphy's Law blog got nominated, but it went up against an entire website. And as a blog versus a website, that felt like, Goliath and the giant, but I didn't have as good aim as the giant or something like that.
No, so I completely agree. And that was one of the reasons that we did stuff like the open source digital forensic software of the year and things like that. And we'll continue to evolve this and add categories and get rid of useless categories like podcast of the year.
How about bloopers of the year?
Wait. I'd like to argue something on podcast of the year. So now that you're back, next year this needs to be a category. We've got the Digital Forensic Survival podcast now that Mike's doing, the DFSP. Lunch this year did the Test Kitchen, which was pretty cool. We've got Cybersecurity Interviews, which does a lot of digital forensic stuff. So there really is now a lot more, because there was a lull where there weren't many podcasts, but now there are more. So it might be something to explore for next year.
I was speaking rather facetiously.
We could do the blooper of the year, Lee, and you could nominate the first try on this.
The first 20 minutes of this particular episode, it'd be awesome.
29 for 20. There you go.
Surefire winner. I also, I did have a 1.8 inch. So for those of you who don't know,
that's a bad
1.8 inch hard drive. 1.8 inch hard drive. Thanks, Cindy. That piece that told the story. So for those of you who don't know, the Forensic Forecast Awards are put on hard drives. They're laser engraved onto hard drive platters. And so they've always been like the 3.5 inch hard disk drives. And I ended up, one of my old iPods died, and I ended up with a 1.8 inch, like tiny ZIF hard drive. And I wanted to come up with a special award for that. And I'm still pondering on what award that could be.
Part of the year?
And I had some ideas which were not that idea, Jessica. We'll see. Maybe the unofficial Forensic Forecast Awards will make their appearance again sometime in the future. We'll see.
We got some mentions that there's some other resources to think of that were just brought up as examples, and because it also goes against what Cindy was saying tomorrow, like 5 minutes ago, that Forensics Focus is more of a resource potentially. The Forensic Wiki, if people are thinking of other things for that category that are a little bit different than a blog.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically anything that's online that's not a blog. So yeah,
not just merely a blog. Yeah. Yes.
Well, not just yes. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with having. I'm giving up. What time is it?
Do.
So yes, absolutely. Anything which you would use for learning about digital forensics online, if it's not a blog, essentially is what that is going to be.
So I'm going to raise the question. I'm good at that. So is This Week in Forensics, which rounds up resources but also gives commentary, is that a blog or a resource?
I would say that comes under resource, because that's like you said before, like a compendium of information. And yeah, he adds some commentary on there. And it's sorry, go on.
Oh, there is This Month in Forensics podcast.
Podcast too. So.
And there's going to be more categories, obviously. I'm going to run out of hard drives soon.
You'll never run out of hard drives. There's always more hard drives.
A blog-like entity, a resource-like entity.
Yeah. Forensic alcoholic drink of the year probably coming some point too. All right. So we talked about blogs. So this is a really good segue. Sarah, you posted an article in the last week or so about iOS imaging on the cheap. Well, in fact, you posted 2 articles, part 1 and part 2.
Right.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about what those articles entailed?
Sure. So the one from last week was kind of an updated version of my previous article that I linked to in the one that is out on my blog now. And the blog is, I don't know if you're going to have notes or something, but it's Mac Forensics, MAC4N6, like number 4, letter N, number 6, just to make it super complicated, .com. So the iOS imaging on the cheap. What I wanted to accomplish by this is to show people that you can get what I'm calling a physical logical image of an iOS device if you can get past the jailbreaking stage. Now, I know, forensically speaking, that is whether you should do it or not. We can have that discussion at any bar whenever you'd like. But I also encourage people to do this on test devices. If anything, you can look for what artifacts are created by certain actions on the device. So the iOS imaging really goes through, it doesn't show you specifically how to jailbreak a device, because there are a few different jailbreaks out there for different iOS versions. I give you some links to figure out if you can jailbreak the device. You can go look online for different instructions, which is pretty useful. And I sort of go through and show you, how to either, install SSH on the device, or if it's already pre-installed on the device, which depends on the jailbreak itself, and how to pull off the files in my physical logical format. And this is just going to give you access to the files. So, it's not your big forensic tools. It's not your Celebrite, your XRYs, your whatever else is out there that's doing this. This is free. This is using not quite open source tools, but they're free tools that are out there for you to be able to pull some of this data back. And I end up using this a lot for my research. So day job is primarily mobile research and forensics. I don't have to be forensically sound, which is very useful. Be very aware that this is not a true forensic procedure. It just gets you access to the data. But I do this a lot because I want to see what the app artifacts are for a specific app that I install. What databases does it create? Whatplists is it getting access to? And it's not just app data, it's the native data too. A lot of the other articles that I have on my blog have to do with a lot of the databases and plist files that are not accessible through other backup means. So your iTunes backups, your Celebrite backups, they're just not accessible, but they contain such good data that I hope that it will kind of open the eyes of some people who think that if they have an iTunes backup that they have everything, when in fact they really don't. And there's some really juicy stuff out there that I think can become very handy. And just as a precursor, I hope to have a new blog article out this week, I'm hoping, depending on if I procrastinate enough on something else. to do a little bit more of that research type stuff for some iOS 11 artifacts.
Okay, so what are some of the reasons that someone might actually want to jailbreak a phone to get to forensic evidence as opposed to not?
So the one thing I like to point out, the big thing I really love is location data. You can get some really awesome historical location data. So if you're trying to pinpoint where a person was at a certain time period, there's a few database files in there. There's a few plist files that you can exploit to pull some of that data back. Now, it's not historical for like years and years and years on end, but say very, very granular data for like the last 24 hours. Or the frequent locations, or now in iOS 11, significant locations. So like my phone, if I look on it, it shows that I'm going to my gym class every single day at the same particular hour. It shows where I'm going to work. It shows that I like to eat out at certain locations throughout the week as well. So you can kind of do some profiling to get a better idea of where that person's, where do they go on a daily, weekly basis kind of thing.
Also, with those jailbroken phones, you're going to get more access to email content and to passwords as well that you wouldn't get otherwise. So there are definitely good reasons to jailbreak phones. And I would say as time goes forward and more testing happens, this is probably the sort of thing that will end up incorporated in some of the forensic methodologies that we're already using, because they seem to be temporary, right? Like it sounds from what Sarah's writing that these aren't permanent jailbreaks, that they revert after the fact. So it may be something that we can use as long as we can put that original ROM back. So this is actually like the number one question that comes out of 585 on iOS Day is, what are the free tools I can use to get images of iPhones, because I can't afford the big tools. And so Magnets acquire, and these other jailbreak methods are some of the tools we point people towards. And iTunes.
And actually, Sarah and I are actually meeting up in 2 weeks, and we're going to try to see because I don't have a jailbroken 10.3 or an 11 phone like she has, so we're going to meet up and see if we can actually pull those with Acquire. So we'll see how that goes. Because in theory, if the phone is jailbreak depending on what access the jailbreak has, it should work without you having to manually SSH, and it's free.
And the other thing to remember too is that some of that protected app data may come out with a jailbroken phone that won't come out with a phone that isn't jailbroken. So sometimes when nothing else works, that's what you're left with. In the private sector, I've got a little more leeway than I used to have in law enforcement, which is really nice to have. But even if you're in law enforcement, I think there are times and ways to justify use of these tools as long as they're documented correctly. So that's one of the things we go over in the 585 class as well, is how to take something that isn't technically a forensics tool. It's not designed for that, and how to test and validate it so that you can use it in your forensics work in law enforcement. So, and
I think that's one of the keys, right? If you've tested and validated a method, and then on an exemplar device and documented it, then you have a process proof that can be applied to the evidence, providing you're using the same model, the same operating system, etc. And doing that allows us to, it's all about the documentation and all about doing that testing and validation. That's critical.
Yay, science. Yay, science. Just my choose science.
Actually, you know what? Something else that came out this week was NIST put out a paper, the OSAP, specifically about taking traditional forensic methodology and how that really should be being applied to digital forensics. And it's interesting because it actually gives us a little more leeway instead of restricting us more, because it allows us to use these basic principles of testing and having a hypothesis and then having it be reproducible and then applying it to evidence, which sometimes we're hankered down by and not allowed. So I actually was really expecting of that.
So I would argue we've always been allowed to. It's just many people haven't understood that we're allowed to, because all of forensics is based on the scientific process. And so we've had these fake sort of restrictions placed on what's forensically sound and what's not forensically sound that we sort of self-restricted in ourselves on falsely. So yeah, I think it's great that NIST has done that, and I think this is an area that we all need to talk more about. And you know, growing up with a scientist in my family, it's stuff that I absolutely love. My dad would be really happy to see that digital forensics has come in this direction finally.
And I think those of us who did a lot of mobile work as we were coming up, I think are a little more on that side, because you've never been able to really, unless you're doing a chip off, you can't right block a phone. You have to actually send communication to the phone, pull data back. And the secret has always been documentation and understanding your footprint and doing testing and validation. And now that cases have flipped and our labs are not primarily computer, that we have more mobile coming across, I think people are starting to be more open to that.
I've definitely had some folks within law enforcement in a variety of different locations and places and countries come to me with, you know, needing help from data from jailbroken devices. So it's obviously being done, you know, maybe as a last resort to get a very specific piece of evidence. But there is procedures out there. People are doing it. So there is hope. You just got to be careful. And again, documentation is key.
I've also received devices that were jailbroken by the user.
Yeah, I'll say I see that a lot more in the private sector than I used to see it in public work. But and I don't know what the difference is. It's probably just the customer base, right? But but whatever the case is, I'm seeing more devices that are jailbroken come into Gilware than I ever saw come into my law enforcement lab.
Right. So if you didn't know about the extra information that Sarah points out that's available, you might think just getting that traditional iTunes backup data is the full breadth and depth, when it's not. And, you know, on that same note, it's worth it to also get the cloud acquisition if you can, because the cloud data can differ. And also, typically, you have about 3 cloud backups at different times, so you can get some timestamp data over a historical 3 periods by doing that as well.
Okay, I just want to go back to something that Cindy said, because I thought it was pretty interesting. See, I would have thought that given the amount of time it takes to do a lot of these prosecutions, that jailbreaking would have probably been more beneficial or realistic for law enforcement due to the delay in actually getting to the evidence and bringing a case to court and everything else than it would do for the private sector. Because jailbreaks aren't, I mean, you can't say, here's an iPhone 10 with iOS 11.02, jailbreak this for me and get a full forensic image.
So I think that there's historically a couple of roadblocks that have been put in place, and both of them are probably false roadblocks. The first one is the term itself, jailbreak. When you go in front of a judge and ask for a warrant to be signed that says, I want to jailbreak this device, it sounds illegitimate. It's sort of like, I would never in local law enforcement use the term phone exploitation, because it sounds like I'm doing something wrong. It harkens back in a judge's mind to, you know, exploitation cases. So that's the number one false problems. We have to explain what we're doing, and that name. And this is when Jonathan Judarski introduced his jailbreak method back 2008, 2007, early on, for full physical images of iPhone 4s. This caused a huge stir in the community about whether it was legal or illegal. And I just basically said, you know, that's kind of a horseshit argument. It doesn't matter if we're excuse my language. It doesn't matter if we're breaking a user warranty or if we're jailbreaking this phone. What matters is the footprint we leave behind. So that's where we need to focus our research, is when we do the Judarski method, are we changing that system, that system partition? Yes. Are we changing the user data? No. So therefore, it is a method that we can apply in law enforcement. So that was, you know, so the name is one of the problems that came up early. And then the other problem was just in terms of us debating, is this forensically sound or not, which is again where science comes in. You know, so for some vendors out there early on in 2008, they were very vocal saying, jailbreaking phones isn't something you should be doing, right? Like you could mess up the phone, you're going to void the user warranty, and you might brick the phone. So that, you know, again, yay science, right? What we need to do is test the method and validate that it works and that it's useful for our purposes, and explain all of that in words that judges and cops can understand, and lawyers can understand, and juries can understand sometimes. So that's sort of the way things came up historically.
I think it's interesting, the whole, that, you know, forensics has changed quite a lot in the last few years with that that kind of thing, where, you know, phones, like Jessica mentioned, you can't get a phone without changing the data, at least some data on there. With forensic images, it used to be, you know, hard drive, right blocker, full forensic image, great, nothing's changed on the drive, except, well, yeah, stuff does change on the drive. This, you know, some
right,
smart
and
data
this whole
and
idea,
everything else changes.
This whole idea of full forensic image, right? For people who don't understand that their right blocker, you know, what they're able to address doesn't address every sector on that platter, that there are reserved areas that they're not even touching or understanding, and that they are changing those. I mean, that doesn't end up in reports, and that doesn't end up in the knowledge of a lot of forensic examiners or of courts. And then when people figure it out, they're going, wow, you know, was I living a lie all these years? Todd Shipley did a wonderful paper on this all the way back in like 2012 or 13, saying, hey, folks, what you think you're doing when you do a right blocked full forensic image of a hard drive may not be what you're actually doing. So, and that's smart data, that data that we don't usually look at, can hold a lot of really cool secrets that that we may ignore otherwise. So
yeah, absolutely.
blog post come out on Monday where I use smart data to prove things. So, Tuesday maybe, because it's a holiday.
Or maybe you'll get nominated for an award. So even past that, even if you take that into consideration, we've moved on, and now we have people doing memory forensics. Now, you sure as hell can't take a memory forensic image without changing data. Then you've got
solid state drives.
Yeah, that's it. The evolution of the hard drive. You now have SSDs, which are changing while you're taking the forensic image. So absolutely. I mean, it's about knowing what's going on with those systems,
but
and about how to reduce the footprint as much as possible, like you said.
And part of what I always say to people in my class who get really nervous about this is, hey, let's compare this to a traditional blood and guts crime scene, right? You have a body on the floor, knife in the chest. And as you approach that scene, you are going to have to change stuff to process it. Just the act of waiting in time. I'm wrestling with a dog on the side here, in case you haven't noticed that. But just the act of waiting to take pictures and document that scene. You know, blood is drying, things are pooling, that body is already engaged in active decomp. And when we lift a fingerprint, we're changing that fingerprint by throwing dust at it. So it doesn't change the fact that it's forensics. It just means that we need to be better educated about what actions we're taking when we do forensics.
Absolutely. So I'm going to look forward to reading that blog article tomorrow. That was very interesting. Yeah, before I came to the US, I worked for a company called Disk Labs, and it was amazing to me, the stuff which could be hidden on a hard drive. You know, changing the hard drive size and everything else could easily be done. And my initial response whenever I saw it happen the first time was like, "You just broken forensics. Well done."
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, when Todd wrote his article and demonstrated that you could write to the spare area of a hard drive images, pictures that no forensics tool could see, because they weren't in the addressable areas of the hard drive, they were in the reserved areas. I thought to myself, oh my God, Todd, you just broke forensics, right? And then I got over it, because all sorts of things come along and break forensics. But I realized that because I'm aware of that, I changed the way I write my reports, right? I don't say I obtained a full forensic image of the hard drive, I say I obtained a full forensic image of the addressable areas of the user addressable areas of that hard drive. So it changed my language. And then if I need to dig in deeper and say, hey, there's something about reserved area on this drive that's important, then I'll do that.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about, and Sarah has a little bit of an idea about this too, I suspect, is the Apple file system, which was another thing which people thought, oh no, forensics has been broken again, kind of thing. So what can you tell us about APFS, Sarah?
That it's a big pain in my butt. Right now, I'm kind of just waiting for Apple to release documentation so I can write final documentation. I always get the question, when is APFS going to be rolled into Forensics 5.18? I'm like, it is now, to a point. Every update that I have, the more and more stuff I want to put in there. We aren't going to do yet a deep dive hex in-depth version of APFS yet because it's still changing. So I'm going to wait a few more months until I kind of figure that out. But again, if you take the class today, there is definitely APFS in there. How to address it, what kind of caveats are we seeing with it? There's not even a lot of forensic tools. The big forensic suites can't even support it yet. So everybody is kind of in this waiting period. How often does a new file system come out? It's been, 20 years since HFS, HFS Plus even came out. So from a forensic standpoint, everybody is freaking the heck out, including myself. I'm excited because I think the old operating system, HFS Plus, is deprecated in so many ways. I know I teach it and we go really in depth, and in the documentation that Apple has deprecated for at least, I would say, a decade now or so, there's all these areas in the documentation that says reserved for future use. But when I'm going into it and I'm looking at the hex and I'm parsing each individual byte out, guess what's being used now? Those reserved for future uses. So I'm going in there and trying to figure out how are they being used. Now, as far as that relates to APFS, I fully expect that APFS is changing right now. That's probably one of the reasons we don't have this final documentation. They're still kind of figuring out where stuff is. It is brand freaking new. So it's both terrifying and exciting at the same time. And you can be sure that you will be seeing bits and pieces of it in presentations and blog articles and all sorts of stuff. Even in that last blog article I was just talking about, APFS was also causing issues. We can't get DD level access to the system partition on iOS right now due to permissions. And that seems to have come out about when APFS came out. I don't know if APS is the true reason for that. It could be a permissions issue too, but it is kind of an interesting feature. So as far as what I'm covering in the course right now is how to get that first triage level, what to image, how to mount it, because mounting is the first part. Since our forensic tools don't actually work, we need to be able to read these things right now. So I put another blog article out there on how to mount it on using Apple file systems or Mac OS. And I know Mari DeGrazia has put out some excellent articles on how to do the same thing with Linux and with Windows as well. So I'm super thrilled to see that she put those out.
Okay, so I got a question. You said that stuff's still changing. So do you actually mean that APFS itself is changing, or is it just that when you think you have something figured out and then you find something new?
It's not, so I don't know for sure. People have already done some research out there. It's one of those things where I haven't delved in deep enough yet to go bit by bit by bit to actually see what's been changing. It's one of these assumptions that I'm making with Apple right now. They love to tweak stuff in almost production. Big example of this one is the unified logs. When unified logs came out in 1012, they looked a certain way. Then the next point release came out. They looked a little bit different. And then the next release came out and they looked a little bit different. So they're almost changing it throughout the different versions of Mac OS. And frankly, that's driving me absolutely crazy. But it's something that Apple does quite often. So unified logs is a great example of this. I would imagine they're probably doing very similar stuff with APFS right now, trying to figure out where stuff is actually going and how it's being used. But I don't have specific examples of that because I'm still sort of waiting for the dust to settle before I truly dig into the hex of it.
Yeah, that could have some significant impact. I mean, if you happen to have a computer which is running High Sierra, you know, like a 0.1 version, and it has a slightly different APFS way of it working to like a 0.2 or 0.3 version, that obviously could be quite signify about that in code or something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's not like other file systems haven't done this. I mean, HFS Plus has evolved. You know, there used to be HFS, now there's HFS Plus. HFS Plus itself has even evolved throughout that, talking things like extended attributes. Those weren't in the original version, truly, from original HFS Plus to HFS as it is, you know, yesterday. Completely different. NTFS has changed as well. So it's not the only operating system to do this. You know, Microsoft will upgrade, tweak its little file system every once in a while. It's one of those things we just got to be aware of, and unfortunately, it's difficult. But this is what we do as forensic analysts: we research, and try to document this to help others out.
This is so. If you come from the phone world, and I don't. I mean, I came from the computer forensics world into the phone world, but this is more common in the phone world. I mean, they'll change they'll change file system layouts a little bit, change the flash translation layer a little bit, and it breaks forensics tools, right? Like it breaks our tools for acquisition purposes and for parsing purposes. And really, what it comes down to is just the need to understand that when stuff is apparently broken, you know that there's something that's been tweaked in the data you're looking at, and you need to deal with that.
Nokia used to use this PM format back on the old Nokias, permanent memory PM format, and they used to change like what was at subkey 13. On some phones would be sent call logs, and on other phones it would be like ICCIDs. They would change what was in each register, and it would differ not even just by model phone. RM, the firmware on the phone, would change the way that the file system was structured.
Yeah,
so
Brew did that. Yeah, I mean, it's...
Yeah, and I did that too, yeah, on the Qualcomm phone. So I'm talking things that existed in 2004 through 2007. So this is something that's historically part of the landscape.
Absolutely. So I think it was pretty cool that this last week, Mari, as Sarah pointed out, posted a couple of blog entries. Just quickly go back. Sarah posted about how to mount APFS volumes back at the end of November. Obviously, she had a boring Thanksgiving, and then Mari, this obviously had a boring New Year's, and she has posted how to mount APFS both in Windows and in Linux, and I think it's interesting.
There, on Windows, you can't get past File Vault 2.
Sorry.
So it's a mounted
APFS.
Big elephant, right? On an external drive, great, but
wasn't there a library written for that? I thought.
I'm sorry?
I think what it boils down to, anyway, is if you're going to investigate a Mac, you really need to have a Mac to do it. That's, you know, whenever you go and take Sarah's class, for example, if you roll in with a Windows computer, she yells at you and throws things at you. So yeah, if you're going to. Really, you need the right tool for the job, and the right tool for the job is obviously going to be an Apple system. You can get away with doing it, and there is software out there like X-Ways and
Blacklight.
But still, I mean,
neither of which are dealing with FPGA yet.
Yep.
No Windows software yet that's able to deal with FPGA. And so, it brings up an interesting question when you're talking about budgets and labs, because if you've already made an investment in a small police department in your Windows architecture and you don't have Macs for forensics, it is going to be a problem. And that's what needs to be addressed in budgets and in labs until, somebody has a solution.
But the budget's always going to be based on some kind of risk factor too, though, isn't it? I mean, you don't want to spend. Well, come on. Yeah,
it really honestly isn't. You would think that would be the way that would make sense, Lee, but it's when budgets for city police departments or state police departments or forensics labs get made, it's not based on a particular risk or need. What bleeds gets the money. So the SWAT teams get the money. Even though they get called out 2 times a year, they're going to get more funding than the forensics teams, which are used every day as workhorses and produce evidence for every case. Forensics as science isn't particularly sexy inside police departments. So you would think that budgets would be developed based on need and based on risk, but that's not necessarily the case.
But
31 years.
I guess I mean more internally. Like, so if you have a budget, if you're issued a budget as a forensic science lab, and you've had 1 Mac investigation out of 700 out of the last year.
Yes, point taken.
It doesn't make the financial sense to buy a Mac in order to accommodate that. Now, if you happen to have 1 big high profile Mac case, then yeah, it may be. But yeah, I mean, I very much agree with Jessica's point there. Is, if you don't have the money to do it, it still poses the problem, but it doesn't change the fact that that really the best way to do that is to have an Apple system. But then you could also say I might get 100 5.25-inch floppy disks tomorrow to analyze. Hell knows how I would deal with that right now. I don't have a clue.
Just call me, Lee. I can help you out there. And it has its advantages.
One thing which comes to mind is that when I was at Digital Discovery, we got this one case in. It was an e-discovery case, and so it wasn't like particularly urgent matter or anything. But we had these huge cassette cartridges that are like the size of a laptop. I'm like, I don't even know what these are, let alone how to get the data off them. But do you justify? But do you justify buying the piece of equipment and an old computer to run it?
So there's a computer museum out there. I think the Menz brothers are involved in the upkeep of it. I could be totally wrong on that, but that's what my memory is telling me. And they have like one of everything ever produced, right? Like the high density floppy things and every version of zip that happened for 10 seconds. And I have heard of police departments going to this computer museum and saying, hey, could I check out that piece of equipment because I have this case that I need? So somebody's going to know what that laptop size tape is. It's just a matter of finding the equipment to do the job. So,
oh yeah, we found out what it was, but I've got to tell you a funny story just quickly. So when I first went to DD, I can be a bit of a clean freak for the lab, and if there's old junk equipment lying around, I want to get rid of it. And so what happened is that I was doing a regular cleanup of the lab not long after I started there, and there was this old beaten up computer lying in one of the cubicles. And so I was like, we're getting rid of it. I'm just going to throw it away. I kid you not, the next day we had someone send us a bunch of floppy disks. And I'm like, we don't have anything to read these with. And someone said, where's the old computer that was in that cubicle? I'm like, I got rid of it. I'm like, no, that was specifically there deals with old technology so that we don't have to worry about how to deal with it. I'm like, oh, yeah, oops. So yeah, so now I have a perfectly good excuse to hoard all of my old computer junk at the house without Alicia getting angry at me. So yeah, works out pretty well. It doesn't really. So
now we know what that little hard drive award can be for. Were you discussing it on this version or the last version? It can be for the forensic oops of the year.
Yeah. I would collect so many of those.
Happy accidents. Stuff, all the best stuff comes out of some sort of happy accident.
Absolutely. Okay, so if you haven't done so already, go and check out Sarah's article for mounting APFS on Apple systems, and then also go check out Mari's. I'll blame it on the accent. Mari's articles for mounting on both Windows and Linux. Very, very useful, especially because the forensic suites are not struggling, but they're taking a little bit of time to catch up. I think X-Ways now detects if something is APFS, but won't actually pass the file system yet. So the tools are still catching up a little bit there, but they'll get there. But in the meantime, this is a really good alternative if you have a dire need to get into these. Let's see. Jessica.
Yeah.
You had a couple of things you wanted to talk about. So first one is the about DFIR to-do list. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the new research page. So actually, the credit of this idea 100% goes to Phil Moore from This Week in Forensics. So we were chatting, and he was talking about all these things he wishes he had time for, and saying, I wish there was just a to-do list that we could put him up there for other people who are looking for research to go ahead and partake in. And so this is great for students who are looking for research projects. This is great for people who are looking to get into DFIR and are looking for research projects. And it's great for those of us who have lots of ideas of things we want to research, but don't have time. So I had also been having this conversation with David Cowan, SANS instructor. Wouldn't it be great if there was this list for all of these students who are looking for projects and people who are looking to get into DFIR of things they could do? And somebody could also, if it's something you're interested in and you have things that you haven't had a chance, you can participate by posting something. You can also volunteer to mentor and to do something. And multiple people can volunteer to research. And the goal is it's not even just research. Some of the other things we're really missing are images that everyone can use to test with. Like NIST used to be really good about having the images on the CFRET site. Doesn't exist. So I talked to actually both of the resource pages I mentioned before. I messaged together Devin and Mary Ellen from About DFIR along with Brett. And Devin jumped on and he said, yeah, if you send me a couple ideas, go ahead and put it up. And he put it up on the website, and they're willing to have a space. They're not involved in any of the research unless they want to be. And they don't own it or anything else. The whole idea is these are things that people are looking for research on and would like other people to work on, or they're willing to work with them, or they need somebody who has the right skill set. So for example, a simple one I put up there was, and it's simple for the right person. I need someone to do the ISP pinout of the Echo Show. I will give them an Echo Show board that I have. The problem is I actually am just out of time. Like I've had it on my personal to-do list for 3 months, and I just haven't had it done. And so so for somebody who actually has the right skill set, pretty simple tasks, right? Once the chip is off the board, all you got to do is probe it with a multimeter if you have that skill set, and put it out and share it to the rest of the community. There's a lot, but then I put some ridiculous ones up there, like I put figuring out how to unpuck lock SIMs, but because it would be great if somebody did it. But I do recognize that that's extraordinarily advanced research. But there's also some tasks on there to create iOS 11, iOS, Android 8 images, etc., because there aren't ones for public consumption that everyone can use across the board for testing. Mm-hmm. And so I encourage everyone who's listening to this, Please post your ideas that you have in hopes that somebody else maybe has time to do the things you haven't gotten to. And if you're looking for things and ways to contribute and ways to share with the community, here are some that people are saying this may be of value. And if there's something on there that you're willing to mentor somebody on and help them on, you can volunteer to mentor too.
Cool, yeah. I'm just looking at the site now, and it's got some pretty cool stuff, like people have asked for already. And so I see, like, yeah, Jessica is by far the largest contributor here. But like, there's
the forensics honeydew list.
I mean, it is, but the cool thing is
watching the show right now, so
I think one of the cool things about this, like, so just one of them, for example, is the google.com search engine URL parsing, and Phil's gone in and he's marked that as complete and posted the link there. So the thing I think is really cool about this is that some people may have already have done this work, and we don't know. Either because their blog isn't very popular or for whatever other reason.
That's really good. Here. The reason that all those other URL parsing ones are on there was I actually had somebody reach out to me and I think they actually also posted on the subreddit, and it's the reason I put that one up there, is they were asking specifically about the queries on the URLs for Bings with a specific search engine. So I went ahead and did some testing and research, and I'm like, you know what? There is all of the different varieties of this need to be done. Phil has done some great stuff this last year on the Google URL parsing. He put out a script for it, and he well documented it. So it's also a great resource for someone to go to see how to maybe document this type of research if they're doing it. And there's a SANS podcast on it too, so you can actually hear what the testing procedure was, etc. So if somebody wants to pick up any of those, and feel free to pick a different pair of, because it's the mix of the search engine and the browser combined is going to change the way those URL strings appear. And some of them give you buckets, but some of them give you gold. And each one needs to be researched and tested and documented and put out there. So hopefully people have time to do it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I really like the idea, and I might just post some things up there that I can use, so I could submit a talk to the SANS Forensic Summit.
Well, there you go. Right?
Oh, hey, nice segue. Nice segue.
Great things that people could research and submit. And I love that Sarah just in time took off her overshirt and is now wearing the DFIR Summit T-shirt. Like, that was perfect too, Sarah.
Also, it's just hot in here. I'm just a shill, really. I just sans everything. It's like 50% of my wardrobe at this point.
So the reason for that segue is because I meant to mention this earlier in the show, and I kind of spaced it with all the technical issues we were having, is that tomorrow, as we're talking here, tomorrow is the last day that you can submit for the CFP for the SANS Forensic Summit in Austin this year, the same place where we hold the annual Forensic Forecast Awards. But they close at 5 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. So if you have an idea for a talk or presentation, something which is really cool and interesting, and by all means, make that submission. Cindy, I believe, is on the selection board. Is that right?
I think so. I think I got tapped for that this year. So
okay.
I also decided the topic of my talk from this conversation. So I will be submitting.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's going to be something about, stuff I thought was true in forensics until I had some data recovery experience. I used to have, sort of look down my nose at those data recovery folks, but holy cow, there's some cool stuff in the data recovery world that we need to leverage in forensics. And so I think that I'll take my time at the summit to talk about maybe my top 3 or my top 5 discoveries from data recovery that can be leveraged for us to do better forensic exams.
I almost submitted something like that a couple of years ago. I think I have a piece of a presentation written for that already somewhere.
Well, maybe we should co-present it.
Tag team that.
I don't want to drag you down.
Just send me what you got. I'll build on it.
And Sarah, I believe you almost have to submit, don't you, being a SANS instructor?
It's not that we have to. It's encouraged, but I like to submit every year. I do, mostly because it's just my favorite conference of the whole year. I call it my forensic summer camp. It's with all my friends. It's in Austin. It's fantastic. And the presentations are top notch. Some really cool, interesting stuff.
It is a forensics family reunion. That conference is the most personal, most pleasant conference that happens every year.
Just as a little, I have not written up my CFP yet because I'm a procrastinator and I have to wait until the very last minute possible. So tonight, maybe tomorrow. But just as a hint of what I am thinking of doing is the hashtag that we've been using, D for Fit. So I'm going to be looking at some health information, I think. So just a shout out there. And I'm also on the selection committee too, which also helps. Full disclosure. But other people, there's actually quite a few of us on the selection committee. So it's not that I'm just going to pick all my buddies, but yeah, if you got interesting topics, we're always looking for, weird stuff, helpful stuff, some, in-depth research. We'd like to have this as highly technical as possible. There's plenty of forensics conferences out there, but we really want, the top-notch type of stuff.
And so, I will say, Sarah, they will take a non-technical subject. We talked last year, Ryan Pittman and I, Matt Linton, Ryan Pittman and I teamed up on some research about music and forensics and how music helps your brain in ways that are useful for forensics, and ended I think it was day 2 of the summit with a musical presentation. Put together a team of 7 people who had never played together, 5 or 7 people, and played an actual song at the end of our presentation. And you could see how that teamwork came together, to be a song that people could recognize. And it didn't suck for us never having played together. So
I thought it was awesome. I love it. I love just anything different, We can talk about file systems all day. We could talk about this and APT and intrusion and registry all day long. But it's stuff that's different, which makes it the most exciting, I think.
And it's a great conference for stretching your wings as a speaker. So if you're looking to get out there and try something weird and different and test your skills as a speaker and as a forensic examiner, it's a great place to do it.
Absolutely. It's actually one of my first major conferences that I spoke at back 2012 when I was just getting on the speaking circuit, and now I can't stop. So it's a great place. It's very friendly. It's just awesome. Favorite conference.
And you know what? To the level and quality of the presentations there, I think that's one of the greatest things. Every other conference you go to has multiple tracks. Typically, not true of even OSCFCon has multiple tracks in the afternoon. But most conferences have multiple tracks, and you think, which one do I go to? Am I getting to see the best presentation? Well, SANS DFIR Summit makes sure that it only picks the best presentations, and they only do one track, so you're not missing anything. I know that sounds really weird, but I think it's such a credence to the quality that there only needs to be one track. Does that make sense? Does to me.
They have changed that format over the years. They used to run, breakout tracks, but I think
this year. I don't know. I was making an assumption. I really liked it as one track, but you didn't feel anything, if that makes sense. So I might have just completely gone against whatever Cindy and Sarah are planning.
I honestly don't know what the plan is for this year yet, and it's probably still under development. But the other thing is that they professionally record your presentations, and they get put out on a YouTube channel. And again, it's that friendly audience and a really good opportunity to, you know, to break out as a speaker in the community. So great opportunity.
And if you are nervous about speaking in general, which I understand a lot of people are, it's really good because you don't have an hour slot. You have a maximum of 30 minutes, unless you're Jessica and Brian, a maximum of 30 minutes in which you give 20 minutes of presentation. And then
we were asked to fill time. We fixed the schedule.
And then you get 5 minutes of questions, and it's 5 minutes essentially between sessions. So you don't, if you don't even like speaking, but you just want to get something out there, and 20 minutes is enough, then it's a fantastic time to do that. You don't have to fill a whole hour and, you know, get nervous or anything else. You just go out there, 20 minutes, done, boom, finished.
And I'll say, Lee, as a speaker who is used to the 1 hour format or even longer than that, you know, as someone who trains all day, every day when I'm working for SANS, trying to fit what you want to say into an hour, if you've chosen a highly technical topic and you're really covering that subject, it's a challenge, and it's a good challenge. It makes you, you know, be efficient and use your time wisely. So,
and also because of the professional recording, at least it was this way last year, you can't see the audience because of the lights. So if you're a new speaker, actually, if you're a new speaker,
very true.
I actually think that helps.
Yeah, I mean, you can't see anything for 30 minutes afterwards either, but.
That is true. I swear people were asking questions and I looked the opposite way and pretended they were on the opposite side of the room. And once I made a mistake, I just stayed with it. Because I had no idea where they were coming from, so I couldn't see.
It's fun. I mean, I have to echo Cindy's comments there that, you know, it's the first, it was the first real forensics conference that I ever attended. And it's the one that I definitely go back to every year. I kind of feel at home there, and it's in Texas. You can't really go wrong. So yeah, okay. I think Jessica actually had a couple of other things you wanted to talk about.
Oh yeah, so I guess I wanted to mention something I've been working on, and I guess this is I'll go ahead and publicly mention it. So anybody who was at the SAMS-DFIR Summit last year knows that Brian and Moran and I did a presentation on the forensics of the Amazon Echo, the Echo system, and we went on and did some other projects, and I've been doing a bit of IoT forensics. And
Jessica, you just woke up my Echo.
Now can we do a cloud dump of it? No. You know, so I've actually started expanding into some other IoT forensics areas, and I've decided that I need to stretch the ways I was sharing, and so I'm actually working on a book on IoT forensics. So that is my current project. I've got some awesome contributors who are sharing some of their knowledge from some different perspectives, and if there's anybody who has something to contribute, please reach out to me. Twitter is a really good place to get a hold of me, or my email at Magnet or at GMU. But yeah, I'm really excited, and now I've said it really publicly, so now I've got to freaking finish it. But I've been writing every day, and it's the goal is to give both, because the thing with IoT is it's always changing, right? So you can't just give a formulaic of how to do stuff. And of interest to me is I've actually gotten calls from police departments, even in the last 3 weeks, about, hey, you know, there was an echo on a case, can you help me? And I've been, you know, able to put out some things real quickly to them to help them with their cases. But, you know, it's not just how do I do it on this device. It's how do I understand the methodology of how do I deal with an IoT device? How do I figure out where the data is? How do I recover it? How do I coordinate the different data between the app, the network, the cloud, and the device itself? How do I realize that these systems interact? How do I not spoil the data when I get to the scene by accidentally saying, oh, look, there's a, and then the device goes off and removes the last recording, which is the only one that's actually stored, right? Because these things can happen. So it's more about that. And so it's going to be about the acquisition process, the analysis methodology when dealing with IoT devices, because there are some unique things that you need to think about when you're dealing with these devices, and how you actually create test data and how long you need to do it. But then also going into the different types of systems and different categories. And, there are different categories. There's the systems that exist in the home. There are the things that go, like drones and cars. There are the things that are inside our body and inside our animals' bodies. There are the things that are used for scientific research. There's a variety of different things and different types of systems that exist. And there are books out there on hacking into IoT, and there are books on security of IoT, but there really isn't anything to help people with how to deal with the forensics of IoT, so I'm going to give it a shot.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Very cool. Awesome.
Maybe. You're not the one who's been doing this in the morning. I need more of this, but I write in the morning, so I can't drink while I'm doing it.
All I know is I've avoided writing books.
I may be stupid.
Dave Cowan tells me all the time, never write a book. It's horrible. So
it's a really good exercise in trying to formulate my own mental process, if that makes sense. It's a really good exercise, and thankful for OneNote. I'm going to plug Microsoft OneNote for organizing and allowing me to jump back and forth between different thoughts and not lose track. But yeah, so it'll be good, hopefully. Or it'll suck, and you can all tell me.
I'm sure it's not going to suck. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Just like your post on DFIR job hunting.
Yeah. So I put a post out there on things people can be. Yeah, and actually, this is funny. This is how it started. So the end of the semester is in December. I teach at George Mason University. I teach mobile device forensics. And at the end of the term, part of the last class, one of the things I try to do is I try to give them some, specific ideas and of things they can do as they're going out into the workforce. It's a master's class, so a lot of them are in the field already. And one of the things that I know I always saw as an issue is that job terminology is very bizarre in our field. So because we're not really established, so our jobs aren't always called the same things. And so I actually made this little matrix that I put up in front of the class, and I was like, you take from column 1, column 2, and column 3, they each have a none, and you search all these things and you'll come up with all of the terms that are possible for job hunting. And I had 3 different students come up to me and tell me that was the most valuable thing they got out of the class, which made me feel like I was doing something wrong. But they said that this was something, the hands-on knowledge of how to do acquisitions and analysis of mobile phones, that's what they expected. Like, you know what? I should actually put this out there. And then I started adding more thoughts to it. So it's a post there with just some suggestions that I think are reasonable on things as far as both terminology for looking, places to look, maybe people, because if you're new to the field, maybe you don't know that Ninja Jobs exists, or that About DFIR has a jobs page with DFIR postings. Maybe you don't know that go to a B-Sides to potentially get a resume review, because sometimes those exist there that are being done by incident response professionals. So just a couple of different thoughts on things like that. So hopefully it helps someone.
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. Okay, so cool, yeah. I think that, before I joined SENS, I was on a bit of a forensic job hunt for a while, and it's really interesting, especially with the growing field. Like, it used to be that if I wanted to go and do forensics somewhere, it'd be straightforward, is that they ask me questions about how I image a hard drive, how I do an investigation. Now it's like, well, what do you know about incident response? What do you know about firewall rules? What do you know about packet inspection? And what do you know about malware reverse engineering? It's just that there's a lot to know. And if you don't know exactly what you're going for, like you said, you can feel a little foolish at times. So yeah, I appreciate those
I do want to say, I think that one of the big points that I put in that post was there's a lot of career switchers that come into digital forensics. And I want to encourage that, A, and B, state that 10 years ago, we were all career switchers. It was all people who were coming out of traditional forensics or law investigation or comp sci or engineering, and there was no digital forensics college programs, right? So, A, the field is very accepting of it, and B, please recognize that you probably have relevant skills, and you just need to figure out if they're relevant skills and share them. Sarah's laughing.
I'm not laughing at you, I promised.
She is. Something's funny. I did something really funny. But no,
You did not do anything. Blame Lee. Blame Lee.
I get the blame for everything.
You sent me a message, and I can't help it.
I'm the digital forensic scapegoat.
For the whole community.
And Adobe Photoshop pinup boy. So, all right. Anyone else have anything else they'd like to share before we call it a day?
I think you missed a few things on the list, but we don't have time for them this time.
I'm sure I did.
Which means we have to have another. Go ahead, Sarah.
I want to hear from Ryan. He hasn't spoken.
Yes. He's so quiet.
Tell us about hindsight.
Now just trying to watch. That's all. No, so I've been working. I switched jobs a couple years ago, so I've been doing research kind of for not a bigger company, but a company that does. It's like a security intelligence platform, they're calling it. So it has like a UBA component, like a data lake component, and an incident response kind of automation thing. So I've been on my day job, I'm doing lots of this kind of making these small Python scripts to automate different things that you kind of string together to make a kind of customized solution. But kind of one of the things I've been doing, well, like I guess it's been a theme throughout. So I do a lot of browser forensic stuff. One of the side themes I've been trying to focus on kind of throughout my career is on helping people understand the findings that you have, I guess. I started out, my first like real corporate job was working in a SOC for a big healthcare organization. And our biggest client was HR, right? And so it's like this person might be doing something on a computer, like, can you help us figure out what they're doing? And so you're giving these very non-technical stakeholders, you're their employee, basically. You're trying to give them the answers. So I had to develop ways to present findings to them that they could understand but still were valid technically. So that was like my first exposure to that. But since then, I've been trying to find just the way that the amount of data we have available on all kinds of devices just explodes in the volume, right? With how cheap storage is getting. All these different, everybody has like 5 devices now instead of people having like maybe 1 computer back in the day. So basically, you need to get better at presenting your findings and kind of making things more concise. Like the really line by line deep dive investigation still has its place, but it's not always your starting point, and it shouldn't always be your final product. So I guess I'm looking at a lot of visualization techniques for data, for investigations. I guess that's my interesting kind of side hobby for forensic kind of stuff. So I have some ideas about that I'm working on that I'm not quite out there yet, and I'm like Sarah, I'm a procrastinator, so I'm going to try and put something together for the conference. But basically, yeah, it's kind of investigations nowadays, and so quickly that you need to be able to find some way to speed up at least the initial step to see if you need to take the deep dive or not. So that's kind of my side project.
And I really like that the whole visualization side of things. You know, you see things like the elk stack being used quite a lot, and it's starting to really get a lot of traction now in forensics investigations, where you feed in the data and you can pinpoint on a map where most of the stuff comes from. You can see the like cloud maps of IP addresses, and it just makes things so much faster and easier, especially to show to like people further up the chain from you. This is the overall picture of what we found here, and then you can dive down and show them really specific stuff. So I really like that piece specifically. So yeah, I'll look.
You can lead with a picture or a graphic or an animation versus leading with like some text or like a command line prompt. Like you might keep more of your audience, I guess. So that's one of the things that we're kind of working on.
Likes pretty pictures. Everyone.
But with pretty colors, yeah, it's important.
And that's especially true if you have a jury involved too, because those guys, they don't care. They're just like, man, I want to just gonna get out of here. So that's really helpful for holding their attention specifically, and I've certainly found that in the past. So yeah,
I made a pretty good visualization, which I thought was pretty eye catching, and then the forensic lunch guys went up to me and made it like with Chuck Norris's flying around instead of little dots. So I mean, more exciting and more flashy.
That's awesome.
Well, I had a federal prosecutor once who talked about packets as if they were the Green Bay Packers football quarterback throwing a football. Yeah, I mean, you really have to find ways to make data simple for people to understand. So,
you know, it also helps from an analysis perspective. So, you know, we worked on that connections process with Magnet Axiom, where it's a visual analysis step for coordinating the attributes. And it really is a different way of analyzing. Like, it's the same process that we're used to, but I think it actually expedites things and forces us to think differently and think about other types of correlations, because it puts our minds in a different space for a correlation. And a lot of what we do is correlate data. And I think that that's something else moving forward, and it's kind of what you're onto is correlating data from different areas, because we're used to looking at a drive or looking at a phone or looking at logs, and I don't think there's enough correlation happening. I know that Kim Thompson and I, what we submitted for CFP was correlation of looking at Android app usage and correlating it with the network data. And there's actually some attributes that you can use to correlate that data and make some really impressive timelines. But it was taking two different spaces that we both were working in. I really hadn't looked at Android data externally from using, you know, some probing techniques to read the data externally and seeing it. And it wasn't until we were chatting about something else that we realized there were some common factors that we can tie that stuff together. That's really the future in a lot of ways. What you're talking about, Ryan, is figuring out how to bring these disparate sources of data together. And if you don't do it visually, it's just impossible.
Plus, it's also when you have multiple data sources that have the same conclusion, it makes your case much more bulletproof, right? It's not you're not hanging your whole hat on this one log. Like, this happened, which means this happened, so the guy's guilty, or this happened or didn't happen. If you can have a bunch of different things that all are saying the same thing from different places that require lots of different things to go wrong for them to change. Like, so basically makes your case much more robust. I think it's also very, very valuable.
Corroborating.
Awesome.
Right?
Cool. Well, thanks, Ryan. We waited a long time for the input, but it was awesome at the end. Okay. Okay. I think we've probably taken up more than our allotted amount of time. But thanks everyone for being on. It was my fault. Always is. Like I said, I'm a scapegoat. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for being on. Cindy, thank you for joining us. And
absolutely.
We'll look forward to seeing what presentations you're likely to give at the summit. Sarah, thank you also for joining us. I know that you don't like me at times, and I apologize. It's all my fault again.
I love you. I just love to cause you a lot of pain and trouble whenever I possibly can.
I know.
And payback is coming eventually.
Oh boy. Okay, and thank you to Jessica and Ryan. It was a pleasure having you guys on. First time also. So hopefully.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully, didn't put you off too much, and you'll come back. All right, cool. Well, thanks everyone, and we're going to try and make this a bit more regular than every half a decade. So, take care. We'll see you all later. Yeah.